This is Women Talking Mitzvot, brought to you by Deracheha and the Stella K. Abraham Migdal Oz Women's Beit Midrash as part of their commitment to bringing women's spiritual worlds into halachic discourse. This podcast series has been graciously sponsored by Sigal and Zach in honor of Women's Talmud Torah, Women's Halacha Study, and in merit of Am Yisrael. This episode continues our Tefilla series, today focusing on Pesukei de-zimra, the brachot before and after Shema, and the Shema itself. This episode weaves between meaningful ideas and halachic elements of these tefillot, alongside candid questions surrounding prayer priorities when we're short on time, and what it means to really accept the yoke of heaven in a culture that values autonomy. Hi, Shayna.
Hi, Yosefa.
We've spent time talking about prayer, about tefillah, in general, and the blessings that start off our morning. And we're also going to have an episode that focuses specifically on the Amidah, which is really the focal point of our tefillah. It's what's called tefillah in the rabbinic language. But today we wanted to really give attention to the rest of Shacharit, everything that lies between those brachot that we spoke about and the Amidah. These parts are often given less attention and they sometimes get skipped, and that's Pesukei de-zimra, the brachot before and after Shema, and really the Shema itself, which is also a really focal point of our tefillah.
Yeah, we actually debated whether we should devote an entire episode to these topics because we don't want it to be overkill or boring. You know, there's a limit to how much we could keep talking about tefillah. But at the end, we decided that it's a good idea to give attention, dafka, to these parts of tefillah that are sometimes often overlooked, as you said, and not given space, because there's actually some really meaningful things to talk about. And also, there's practical questions that come up when women, face the issue of what to prioritize, and if they don't have enough time to say all of Shacharit, because Shacharit's one of our longer tefillot, what they should say and maybe what they should cut out. And in order to be able to know what to prioritize, you first need to understand what's included here and what we are saying.
Totally. And the first part that we really come up against, or that we meet after our brachot, is this section of the korbanot.
Yeah.
Some people may not even know it's there, to be quite honest.
Those first 20 pages that
it's very,
many people just
very
skip.
long, and the attention it's given is very disproportionate to the length of the tefillot. And it's a combination of psukim from the Torah and also from the Mishnah and the Gemara. And we really talk about the korbanot, the sacrifices that were brought in the Mikdash. And we spoke in episode 4 how in many ways our tefillah is also meant sort of as a replacement of the korbanot process, of that entire dimension of our religious lives. And so there is something very meaningful about starting off our tefillah with korbanot, because it really sits at the essence of what this is that we're actually doing, and what was the precedent for this entire effort. I think that what's also significant for me when I think about it is that, often we look at the structure of tefillah and almost the rigidity of it and think of that as something that can be an obstacle sometimes. But that is also, in a way, sort of replicating the system of korbanot. Meaning, if it was all just spontaneous tefillah, which is a kind of tefillah we've spoken about, that would be one thing, but it wouldn't be really an iteration of the korbanot, of the system that had many details and many rules and regulations and all different rules about who says what. And so the structure and the repetition and the way that our tefillah has become is in a way also a very real echo of the way the korbanot system functioned. I'll just say on a technical level that there definitely are halachic authorities who hold that reciting these korbanot are not obligatory for women or men. But there are those who do say that at least a korban tamid, which is again sort of a written summary of how they would bring the daily sacrifice in the mikdash, that is possibly something that holds more obligatory weight for women as well. And I try and make an effort to say that tefillah. That was imparted to me when I was 18. I never knew about it before.
Really?
It was the invisible pages of the Siddur. And I was taught that, and I thought, oh, well, if this whole thing is about korbanot, then I should say that. So
inspired by that.
That's something that I do try and say. And I think also that one of the things I just think about when I think about this section of the korbanot is the idea that I think that our tefillah as a system has been so successful in persisting because it's actually more accessible than the korbanot were. Meaning, when we think about korbanot, people weren't bringing them every single day, meaning there was work that was happening there when there was a Beit Mikdash, and there were the Kohanim and those that were placed there. But most of the Am didn't have access to korbanot. And it actually meant that it took away that tool of prayer out of the hands of the regular people. And tefillah, I think in that way, is almost more successful, meaning, right, Chazal instituted, and it gets instituted even more so in the post-Second Temple period with the rise of the Beit Knesset, which wasn't a concept until then. But it's also so successful because it means that everybody can take part. And so we take for granted that accessibility. But when I think about opening up tefillah with korbanot, I think about, isn't that nice that I can keep going and I have this tool in my hands? That wasn't the tool that they always had in their hands.
Interesting. Yeah, I have not said karbanot. It's a part of tefillah that I guess I wasn't ever really raised to say and was never really part of my experience. So when I think of tefillah, there's the Birkot HaShachar that we spoke about. And then, Pesukei de-zimra, starting with Mizmor Shir and Baruch Shamar. So I'm inspired to hear that you say the Karban Tamid, and maybe that's something that I will take with me and try to incorporate. I'm still on the Netilat Yadayim, so this will be next. But beginning with Pesukei de-zimra, which is, the real essential part of the Siddur after Karbanot, we know that it's framed by two brachot. It starts with the bracha of Baruch Shamar, and depending on if you're Sephardi or Ashkenazi, maybe there's Hodu before, or there's Mizmor Shir before, but Baruch Shamar kind of kicks off this section, and it ends with the bracha of Yishtabach, and then there's Hodu, and there's Mizmor the Todah, and there's Yehi Kavod, and there's Ashrei, and there's the 5 Halalukas, and Az Yashir. But the idea of Pesukei de-zimra as a whole, as a section, is to really help us achieve the appropriate state of mind for tefillah. And I loved an insight that I saw from Rabbi Dr. Jay Goldmans in his commentary on a beautiful Siddur called the Koren Ani Tefillah Siddur, where he writes that Pesukei de-zimra is really a way of psyching ourselves up. It's a way of getting ourselves in the mood, into the zone, he says. The same way that athletes might do before a game, when they have a big huddle and everyone gets really focused and they really get themselves in the mood. It's a section of tefillah that includes a lot of praise of God. And the idea is not that God needs our praise, not that we have to butter him up before we start to make our requests, but because if we really want to be able to pray well, we first need to remind ourselves of the amazing world that God has created and of everything that he does for us. So it helps us focus and get into the right mindset so that we can really open ourselves up to be vulnerable to pray. And another insight that Rabbi Goldman shares there is that the word zimra, Pesukei de-zimra, so comes from the word zemer, which we know from Zmirot on Shabbat, which means to sing and it means to praise. But he writes that in Hebrew, there's also another meaning of this word, which is to prune. And he says that just like the way when we plant something and we want it to grow well, first we need to prune away all the weeds or all the things that could prevent the plant from getting the sunlight and could stop its growth. So too, before we really head into the essential parts of Tefillah, Shema and Shmona Esrei, we need to cut away any of the thoughts or distractions or feelings that we have that are stopping us from being able to connect and focus in the way that we want to. It's like Pesukei de-zimra in a way is like nurturing our own souls or giving them the space to really to connect to Hashem before we talk to him. So I really appreciated that and definitely added perspective in terms of what we could hopefully be focusing on when we say Pesukei de-zimra. And one other thing that in preparing for this I saw that also touched me, which is in the RCA Siddur, it's called the Avodat Halev Siddur. They talk there about how Pesukei de-zimra, as we said, starts and ends with a bracha, and the middle is basically a bunch of chapters of prakim, of Tehillim, of Psalms, which is really the same framework as Hallel. We know that the Hallel that we say on Chagim or on Rosh Chodesh also begins and ends with brachot and has a lot of prakim of Tehillim in the middle. But the Siddur there speaks about how the commentary on the Siddur, how what's different is that Hallel focuses on like these rare occasions where either we were in crazy distress and we feel like God, sent salvation, or there's supernatural, miraculous ways in which He intervened and came through for us. Whereas in our daily tefillah, we're focusing much more on the regular, mundane aspects of life. God who controls nature, God who controls the rain and the clouds and the snow and the frost and the grass, or the sun that rises or the moon that shines or the climate that changes. And that ability of like talking to God about things that sometimes we just take for granted or we ignore, they're part of our day-to-day life. That's specifically what we want to focus on as we lead up to the central part of tefillah. Even lines that really stick out to me, like harofeh l'shvurei lev umechabes l'atzvotam, that God is someone who heals the brokenhearted. Like on the one hand, that's a really deep thing. And on the other hand, how many brokenhearted people are out there on a day-to-day basis because of different things that they are dealing with in life and different pains, and saying that God is there for them, or that God is moded anavim, that He lifts up the humble. I think these are specific phrases and lines of Pesukei de-zimra that can really help us to connect to parts of life that we experience all the time, but that we don't always think of as godly. Like the big miraculous thing, the hostages coming home, that we see God's hand in. But the fact that there's dew on the grass every morning is not necessarily something that we think about as something that is deserving of our recognition and praise. So that was meaningful to me. And just in terms of like the halachic aspects, in terms of the obligation to say Pesukei de-zimra, so there are opinions who think that, women, just like men, should be saying Pesukei de-zimra, because if women, as we spoke about in episode 4, are obligated in tefillah, and most poskim think that they should be davening the Amidah of Shacharit, so then they should also be preparing, and the way that you prepare is Pesukei de-zimra, and therefore they should be saying these prakim. But there are others who think that while it's certainly praiseworthy, and it always is nice to say these extra tefillot, that it's optional, either because Pesukei de-zimra is time-bound, it's part of a shacharit prayer and it's supposed to be said at a specific time, or, because just in terms of priorities and what we're going to talk about, it may not be the top thing that somebody has said. So anybody who's interested specifically more in the details of those different opinions could look at the linked article on the Deracheha website and read about different approaches to this. I personally think, as we're saying, that it is a really special part of tefillah that I think can be meaningful if we actually are able to give it some focus.
Well, Shayna, anytime you have an athletic metaphor, I'm always gonna be all for it.
You are the athlete.
I in general, I've said this I think before, but the idea of warming up, right? Warming up, starting to focus. These things take time, and I'm not going to also pretend that it happens every single day. But I think that the idea of using some of tefillah, recognizing that sometimes we're not always going to be in that space before, but we can use the tefillah itself to get us there, I think is a helpful, it's a helpful tip to look at Pesukei de-zimra as a warm up. It's interesting because in all of those beautiful ideas that you shared, I think I also really connect to the first one, which is the idea that, because I think it's a life tip, that we should first praise and look at the good before we also then move into our requests. And I think that Pesukei de-zimra as a prep, right, as we get closer, and then we're going to get closer to the ideas in Shema, that there's something in that generality praise that I think, it's an important idea in life. It also often softens the request, or it can sometimes soften the urgency of our tefillot when we first take a moment to recognize all of those, as you said, regular, daily, present good things that are out there. And I think that that's an idea that's going to stick with me in all those that you shared. One thing I'll also say in regard to Az Yashir, which we're kind of like speaking about, it's like...
Just threw it in there.
Yeah, we're throwing it in there. But it's funny, I actually really, really love Az Yashir. And definitely in the past 2 years that we've experienced such extremes of highs and lows. To me, as Yashir, is always this recognition that like salvation can happen at any moment. Like I really appreciate it. And I found that it's like even days where I was in a rush, and we'll talk about prayer priorities in a moment. It's not the part I wanted to skip, even though halachically it may have been more appropriate to skip that, because I kind of felt like it was an anchor for me of remembering of Yeshuat Hashem Ke'eref Ayin. Like there's something powerful for me in Az Yashir itself, in remembering crossing the sea, and that event that I can imagine that the first generation of Israelites also didn't really think was about to happen. So I think that for me, that's actually a tefillah that I really appreciate. And can we just talk realistically for a moment, Shayna, about how this all functions like in a morning of ours? Can we go there? Yeah, we're okay.
Might be embarrassing, but let's do it.
Yeah, we'll go there. Everyone doesn't always have time to say all of Pesukei de-zimra. Some people are working really early morning shifts, and waking up even earlier is really challenging, or like a really big commute, and getting sometimes, again, job requirements of us, getting kids out the door. Some people of all stages of life just have a really, really hard time focusing. And I think that while these are all real life challenges, the word that comes up for me constantly when it comes to tefillah is the idea of habits. Is what have I trained it's going back, there we go for the athletic metaphor. What have I trained myself to do in these times? I'll be honest, Shayna, that for me, living with a spouse who is committed to daily tefillah, and also most of the time going to minyan, going to shul, and I think this could be true for people living in all different circumstances, living with roommates, right? Or at a stage where they are living by themselves in the house, different elements of our life hold up mirrors to what's actually happening. For me, my mirror for many years has been my husband, where as life got fuller and fuller, he just kept getting up earlier and earlier. And I was like, okay, like be honest with yourself. Like, what are you not able to do? What is hard for you? He's an early morning person. I'm not. And what is me just being a little bit lazy? And so there's also this subtle balance between being honest about what we're able to, crunch into the morning time, the way everybody's morning looks, which is so different, versus like when are we kind of able to push ourselves a little bit harder.
And we're going to touch on this. I think our next episode is going to be on communal prayer. And there's something beautiful about women not necessarily having the pressure of davening in a minyan or davening with a tzibor, because it gives them more flexibility and more space to have maybe kavana, but the obligation that many men may feel of going to minyan means that, as you said, even as life gets busy, they're going to somehow fit that in. Whereas for women, a lot of times, as you are, pointing out, as life gets busy, sometimes we're like, oh, there's no time to daven, or there's no time to daven the way that I used to. And that requires a lot of honest reflection of like, is this a priority for us? I'll say about myself that I really relate because, to the idea of tefillah as a commitment, in the sense that like you do it no matter what, like what you're describing of your husband is like, I'm doing this, so I'll have to go to an earlier minyan. I relate to the idea of tefillah as a commitment. Erev Boker v'Tzarayim, we say, and I myself really do try to daven 3 times a day. And I really try to say most of the tefillah. I don't say karbanot, as I said. I don't say vevarech David or different things that I've cut out here or there. But I'll be honest that I don't always daven in a way that I'm proud of. Just davening, okay, I know that that's one thing. I could pat myself on the back, like I daven. Sometimes I was at an exercise class this morning and I drop off my daughter at the bus stop and then I daven outside before the class. And all these women pass by and they're like, wow, kol hakavod that you daven.
Is it tzadikah?
And it's like, well, okay, like for me, it's like muvan me'elav. It's a given that I daven. But yeah, I could be davening while I'm making my kids' lunches, or while I'm doing errands as I'm walking around the house, or maybe I'm like folding laundry. And now when I think about why that is, I think I was raised, my parents would say this line, of like, a lot of life, 90% of life is just about showing up. Like just be there. Just go to the Shiva call, even if you don't speak up, or just go to the Simcha, even if it's just to say Mazal Tov, and just pick up the phone and, call your grandmother and say Shabbat Shalom, whatever it is. So I think also with Tefillah, there's a part of me that's like, just show up. Okay, so it won't be great and it won't be 100% and whatever. It won't be ideal, but just show up. And on the other hand, it's really a struggle for me, even as I sit here, to admit that like it's not an ideal situation. Or like sometimes I wonder, I guess what I'm thinking about is, should I say less, but like concentrate more on those parts and have more of a relationship and like more of an intention and more of a connection? Or should I just like continue saying what I say, even if I'm not really thinking about it? And especially over the last few weeks, I've been listening to this little cute podcast called Tfiluta from Rav Dov Zinger, who's the head of Mokar Chaim here in Gush Etzion. And it's a podcast where he sits with someone else and like they have a chavruta over tefillah. Like they're discussing how to concentrate more, what you could think about. And one of the ideas they were saying is that like, to go in with like thinking of like how you're thinking about God that day, like what aspect of God or what name of God even, and like, and I'm like, wow, I don't do any of this. Like I kind of just like say the words and say the whatever. And I think it is a balance. Like, yes, the commitment part, but also we don't want to completely lose the meaning in there. So how do we know what we should, be saying and what we shouldn't?
I also just want to say that, and I know we'll talk about the halachic aspects of it next week, but while davening at home is convenient, it also makes it more difficult to concentrate, I find very often.
Totally.
Meaning when you walk out of your house and you walk into a shul, something happens to us. And even if it's very short, and even if someone walks in, many men are walking into minyan, only get in there at the brachot of Shema, and they have the exact same dilemmas. We'll talk about in a minute about priorities, but there's something about being at home which can make it even more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, so it's a double-edged sword, that piece of like the permission to be at home. On the other hand, it can make davening more complex.
Yeah, it's not only about distractions. Like I am not somebody who does very well at like sitting on the couch and doing nothing. So if like I see a pile of laundry, it's like I want to just fold it. I want to
shocks me, Shayna.
I want to get the dishes done. So then it's like, I'm davening. Could I do other things while I'm davening? As opposed to like, no, you're davening. This is all you're supposed to be doing right now.
Yeah, I just feel like it's like doubly hard work to be in that kind of space where we're used to being like active. And I just think another sort of metaphor that I think about often when it comes to tefillah is this idea of tefillah as a muscle, which is, there's the piece
that
about...
fits with the sports also.
Yes, it does fit with the sport metaphor. But there's the piece about, should I daven less and have more kavanah? And tefillah can be a weakened muscle. And it's, once we let it kind of soften, it's often really hard to work it back up. So when we do the cutting out, right, then we end up, it's going to be really hard to go back to putting it in. And then also, I'll tell you just again, a personal example, these are like very uncomfortable things for me to share, but I'm going to do it because I believe that maybe it could be helpful. So I also, for many, many, many years, daven 3 times a day. And I stopped saying Mariv after, I forget now if it was my 3rd or 4th kid, but it was getting to a point where like, I had too much guilt by the fact that I would miss it. And I was just like, you know what? This is a reshut for everybody. Like, this isn't obligatory in that kind of way. It's okay. Like, just cut it out. It wasn't right for me in that moment. And I was very happy with the decision to not daven. But then you know what ended up happening, Shayna? My mincha started getting risky. Meaning, because my risky davening was the Mariv one. And now mincha started getting, complicated. Like,
and that's human nature.
And so like when we kind of like, it's not saying because I weakened on Mariv, it was right for me to stop davening Mariv then. And I've gone back to trying to now, not successfully, but trying to now. But the point is that when we pull back on something, it often then, so something else becomes the front, right? It becomes the front of the challenge. And so mincha became the front of the challenge. And so that's just a piece that
saying, so don't cut things out too quickly.
I'm just saying, think about it. But the other piece that also I think is important is to think about when it was right to cut, and then once in a while have like a self checkup and be like, well, when is it right to put it back in?
Yeah.
Or again, like even in because of changing dynamics, I started mostly going out for Mariv on Motzei Shabbat because it's right outside my door. Again, in this case, my husband's going out there. Half of my kids end up running out without their shoes on also, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. I'm gonna go daven Mariv. Like meaning, I anyways wanted to have a marv. So and that wasn't the right decision though. X number of years ago, So these things shift, and I think that that's a piece that I also take with me.
And I think what you're pointing out is that there's a need to reevaluate, and to be honest. It's make me think of there's a young woman who I really admire, whose life is very full with balancing home and work. And once she shared with me when we were discussing Tefilla and the different challenges of as life evolves and fitting in Tefilla, and she said to me, in my head, I identify as a person who davens 3 times a day, but the foal, in real life, it's just not happening. Right. And I found that so meaningful. I think of it and it makes me smile, because there's something so beautiful that's how she thinks of herself, in her identity and in the way that she connects to Tefillah. She wants to be a person who davens 3 times a day. That's alive for her, and it means that she really feels that deeply, and that also, God willing, one day she will be back in that place when life circumstances are a little bit calmer and a little bit easier. And at the same time, what I'm hearing you say, and what I think is so important, is that we do need to be honest with ourselves. We can't just be stuck in the way that we think of ourselves in our head, when that's not actually what's happening, because then we can't make the best decisions that we can. So if I take an example from another area of halacha, but when I speak to a young couple who's dating or they're engaged and they're really, really committed and they believe in the halacha and they want to keep it and they really want to be shomer negiah, and in their minds, and in their core desire, they think of themselves as a couple that are shomer negiah, but they happen to just be slipping up all the time. So on the one hand, you want to say, wow, it's beautiful that philosophically in your heads, you really are committed to this. But in reality, if it's not happening, then at what point do we say, okay, guys, what are the barriers? What's holding you back from being in the place where you really want to? And only when we could do that, or a young woman who says, I used to daven 3 times a day, and in my head, I still think of myself that way, but it's not happening. So what do I need to do? What do I want to commit to, and what decisions do I want to make, and what's standing in the way, and what's the thing that I need to do to be able to get over that hump? I think with Tefillah, sometimes we need to be honest with ourselves and concretize always at different stages in life, okay, what's right for me now? What do I want to be committed to, as opposed to letting things just flow and slide and then being wait, how did I get here?
Totally.
So, yeah. Now, we are often limited in time. So let's talk about what should we as women prioritize if we're at a stage or a time in life where we don't really have the ability to say everything that we're talking about here.
Totally. So this is the practical part of today's conversation. I think that it's important. Birkot HaShachar, right, our morning brachot are pretty clearly obligatory, and Birkat Torah are really, really important. And we spent a lot of time talking about those for that reason. Mm-hmm. Both can be said at some point over the course of the morning, even while engaging other activities. By the way, Shayna, that's a great skill. I actually can't do that. It's a general Achilles heel of mine. I'm not great at multitasking, even though that's not supposed to be the case for me. I'm not great at it, but I think that it's really powerful. People to me, it's always moving, because it means that it's such a natural part of who you are.
I could fold laundry and say, Malbisha Rumim.
It's
God close.
It's very, very powerful. Anyways, so that's an important piece about those brachot. If you have, let's say, 5 minutes or so to devote to Tefillah, then really you should be saying Shema, right? That's really the crux. And ideally, definitely say the first pasuk of Shema and Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Olam Va'ed, meaning that just initial Kabbalat Malchut Shamayim, which we'll talk about in a moment. If you have some more time, imagine 10 minutes, then abbreviated Pesukei de-zimra, which would be Baruch She'amar, Ashrei Yishtabach. And then you could say the first pasuk of Shema, etc., and then the brachot that are right after Shema, which are also important, and also the Amidah. Okay, that would be more like our 10-minute span. If someone has more time, let's say a little bit more than 10 minutes, then the entire Shema and its brachot, and perhaps also Aleinu at the end of davening, can be added to, right? A really fuller Pesukei de-zimra. Again, we mentioned the Korban Tamid, and the end of Tefillah after the Amidah, which also has a whole host of Tefillot as well. I just want to reiterate something that I said earlier, which is that questions of prayer priorities are not questions that are just for women.
Right.
Many, many, many men, whether they're in their house or especially if they're rushing to get to a minyan, but they get there late, because when you get to a minyan late and they're about to say Shemona Esrei, there's a halacha question you should jump right in, or especially in Shema. So these are not just questions for us. These are really questions for all observant Jews who are trying to daven in the morning. And so I just want to put that out there because I think it's really important. And I mean, look, halachically, reciting whatever we can is always preferable over omitting tefillah, right? And even if we think it's the most bidi eved, right? I'm in my car and I'm about to miss zman. Yeah, so say it in your car before you're about to miss zman. We shouldn't hold out for that like perfect scenario. And I think also you mentioned it earlier, but like this idea about just staying connected, or meaning just putting out that effort is itself is a powerful tool, even if it's not happening in the ideal way we want. I'll say one other thing, which is I don't know if this is relevant for those who are listening to this kind of podcast, but I actually only pretty recently discovered that many women around me don't actually daven daily shacharit anymore, which maybe makes me sound very naive, Shayna. I don't know. I felt silly when I discovered it and felt surprised. I didn't realize that was one of those things that can slip completely. And I guess that I was surprised. I wish it weren't that way. And I think that it goes back to this question about how we structure our morning. Believe me, I am doing far from the ideal on many, many mornings. I'm not saying that because I am in this like perfected state and I wake up at the crack of dawn and, have full kavanah in my morning tefillah. But like this question about like, what are the places that get blurred and what are the places that, this is where we stand, and to structure our morning time around it, I think is a really important question to ask ourselves.
Yeah, and I want to encourage like women and anyone who's listening that you could just start with something, start with brachot, start with Shemona Esrei, start with the first pasuk of Shema. It's not all or nothing. And I say that both for women who never really davened shacharit in the morning. It's not how they were raised, or it's never a routine that they really got into. It's not something that has ever been ever a real part of their life. And I also say that to many, many women who at some point in their lives did devote a lot of time to tefillah, and now for whatever reason, they're not able to, or they're not able to concentrate and have the same level of kavanah. And sometimes what I hear from those women is, well, I know what it means to really daven. Like when I was in Migdal Luz, for example, like I really, really, really davened, and like this isn't that. So like, why is it even worth anything? And there, I think that discouraging feeling of like, if we can't be 100, then like, it's not worth it to even try. I think it's not true. I think that, anything that we've spoken about here is valuable, and whatever somebody is able to do, that ability to accept ourselves even when we're not perfect, especially in the area of tefillah, and especially as women, is something that I think is valuable. So that's Pesukei de-zimra.
Yeah.
Let's move on now to what comes after that.
Yeah, so exactly. After we have the Tefillah Vishtabach, we have the Brachot of Kriyat Shema, right? We have that whole section that's there before the actual Shema itself. And then we have the recitation of the Shema. And one of the ideas that I think is powerful here, and it's spoken about by many, meaning I could see it in early Sidurim, you could see it in commentaries of Rav Kook on the Sidur and Related Deracheha, and this idea of generality and specificity, meaning our first bracha that we say is Yotzer o vore choshech, oseh shalom uvore et hakol, which is actually an iteration of a pasuk in Yeshayahu, where there it actually says the same thing, God who creates light and the darkness and creates peace, but the pasuk actually says uvore ra, okay, but also creates evil. So we don't say that in our tefillah. We want something that's a little bit calmer, and so that those words have been changed. But we have this general thanks to God before we open the Shema section of thanking Hashem for creating the world. And then as we move on, at least in the way Shacharit is formed, in the last bracha that we say in Ahava Rabbah, so we finish it by saying Bocher ba'amo Yisrael ba'ava, right? That we bless Hashem for for choosing us with love. When we say these brachot at Mariv, they're both in a row, meaning we have the first, a general thanks to God, and then we have, which in Mariv is Hama'ariv Aravim, of bringing the evening time, again, a thanks for like the functions of the daytime and nighttime, and then we say Bocher B'Amo Yisrael Ba'ava, so they're like right next to each other in Mariv. In the morning, they're split up a little bit by all the pieces in between. But this idea, I think, of, again, first thanking God for the generality, which we saw a little bit in Pesukei de-zimra, but now we're getting specific. That's the change. We're getting specific to who we are as Am Yisrael, to thanking Hashem. We have elements of covenant, of the breath. That idea starts making its way into Shema. So we've moved away from like the general universal elements of Tefillah now to getting closer to and thank you Hashem for having a relationship with us, Am Yisrael. Yeah. So that's like a very big, like a heart space shift that happens in the Tefillah. That's significant. And also we have also the brachot that are after Kriyat Shema of Emet v'Yatziv and Ve'emet v'Emunah at night, that these perhaps also may be an element of fulfilling the Torah mitzvah of Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. Right? We have this question whether we fulfill that in the Shema itself when we mention, or if it's in those brachot after. And so I would say, to be realistic, sometimes people could skip those parts after, but know that there's actually a halacha question whether those paragraphs after the Shema, before the Amidah, are actually the fulfillment of Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim that we're supposed to do every day.
Which is why, if someone has limited time, the bracha after Shema is added in before the brachot before Shema.
Yeah, which is often surprising. So it's important.
It's not what people expect.
Yeah.
On a technical level, women are exempt from reciting Berachot Kriyat Shema, either because they're time bound, and we spoke about how women are exempt from mitzvot esesha zman grama, mitzvot that are time bound, since ideally these brachot are meant to be said right before and after Kriyat Shema, which is said at a very specific time. So it could be because of that, or it could be, as we're going to speak about in a moment, that women are also exempt from the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema, meaning they're exempt from saying Shema itself. And if Berachot Kriyat Shema are brachot that are connected to the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema, and we're exempt from the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema, so therefore we'd be exempt from them as well. That being said, most opinions still think that women can choose voluntarily to say these brachot, and for that, again, there's more discussion in the linked articles for anyone who's interested.
Yeah. Can I also just be honest, Shayna, that whenever we have these conversations and then we bring in the piece about what women are obligated in, it brings up a discomfort for me. And I want to...
In what way?
Because I don't think of myself as exempt. Meaning, I get that we have to talk about it when it comes to making good halachic choices, but I don't think of myself as that. Like, if I didn't say something, then I missed out. I missed out on something I was supposed to do today. Now, you might say that I'm making my life more complicated, but if I think of myself as a full member of society, of religious society, then whenever I'm just being honest, whenever we bring in these pieces about being patur, like, I'm just like, that's for someone else. I don't know.
It connects back to what we spoke about in terms of the soft bigotry of low expectations. Yeah. It's like, I don't want to have that low expectation of myself. I don't want to think of myself as somebody who has to be exempt. Now, we're happy that exemption is there for when it's needed. There are times that it's really needed, and we've spoken about that. But if I hear what you're saying it shouldn't be the fallback position. It shouldn't be like, oh, I'm a woman, so I could sleep as late as I want, or I'm a woman, so, I don't have to take life seriously. I could just lounge around, or, I could exercise, wake up early to exercise every morning, but I don't have to daven. I think what you're saying is that when there's specific reasons why we're exempt, because somebody is taking care of little kids, or because they're involved with elderly parents, or because they have a very specific commitment and osik b'mitzvah, all these kinds of different things, but not as an excuse to not be very actively engaged and involved in developing our religious lives.
Yeah. I mean, that's my personal standing on this. I really recognize that other people would teach these mitzvot differently, but I guess living the life I do and the beliefs I have about what, all members of society are capable of, like I don't like those, even the words sometimes makes me uncomfortable.
It's a real balance, because there are reasons why those exemptions are there, as we've discussed.
So this brings us to the Shema itself. It starts with the famous pasuk of Shema Yisrael, which everyone seems to agree is a Torah obligation to say, and then is followed by the three paragraphs that we have after, V'ahavta, V'yayim Shemoah, and Vayomer. This sequence is really, really significant of these 3 paragraphs because we have the progression of like Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven, and to then accepting the Mitzvot, right, which is the second parasha. Okay, we have the Mitzvot itself, the understanding of Zachar and Onesh, which, that's a topic for another good podcast, of reward and punishment. And then we have the last paragraph of Vayomer, which focuses on the mitzvah of tzitzit. And, not our mitzvah, but the mitzvah of tzitzit. And the idea, I think, here, which is really significant, is that, we first accept the ruler and then we accept the rules itself. And so there's a really specific progression that's happening here. I'll just share one idea, Shayna, that I really tried to find it when preparing for this episode, and I couldn't find it. Now, there is a sugya in the Gemara, in the Talmud Bavli, about the idea of covering one's eyes. That already existed then. We have stories of different Tanaim and how they would cover their eyes. But I once read, I know I read it in a piece by Rabbi Sachs, but I remember that he was quoting something else, where this idea that, why should we be covering our eyes? Because when you say the pasuk of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, of like this belief tenet in that God is one, when you look around the world can be filled with difficulty. And in order to have that kind of like steadfast belief, sometimes we have to close our eyes a little bit to what we see around us. Yeah. And I also remember where I was standing when I read this, because I remember reading it in my mind, but I might be making this memory up, it was the day before the 3 Narim were found.
The boys that were
kidnapped
in the summer of 2014.
Yeah, over a decade ago, 11 years ago. And I remember reading it then, and I remember it resonating with me. And so that's why I don't have the memory you do, but I remember that's something that I remember very powerfully, because it was in that moment that it touched me. And that's something that I think I pretty regularly do think about when I cover my eyes for Shema. I don't know, some people out there also might be glasses wearers. You are also, Shayna, right? So we always have this question about how we cover our eyes in Shema. The Mishnah teaches us that women are exempt from Kriyat Shema. And you said just now, right, that the Gemara says that maybe this is based on the fact that it's a mitzvah to say Shazman Grama, and that it has to be said at certain times. But the Shulchan Aruch really writes that it's correct for women to recite the Shema, meaning it's ra'ui, that this should be the case as an act of Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, that this is like the acceptance of Hashem in the world. And the Ramah specifically writes that women should definitely say that first pasuk of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And again, I think many women do recite all 3 sections of it. According to the Rambam, Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim is a mitzvah that's distinct from Shema. You can fulfill it by reciting Shema, but it could be fulfilled in any other way, or just by accepting Ol Malchut Shamayim. It's a constant belief. It's not limited to one time specifically. But what this means is that women who recite Shema are not just sort of fulfilling the mitzvah voluntarily, but they're also fulfilling the mitzvah of Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. So it's not just this lovely idea, but that it's also, according to the Rambam at least, 2 separate mitzvot. It's both saying Shema and also Mekabel Ol Malchut Shamayim.
Yeah. I mean, as you keep saying this phrase, Ol Malchut Shamayim,
Yeah.
The yoke of like the kingship of the heavens and accepting that yoke upon ourselves, I just want to like take a step back and say, well, what are we talking about? Because it doesn't
sound like a bad Sonsino translation.
No, but also it doesn't sound the most appealing. Like the imagery of a yoke, like a donkey with a yoke around his neck, it feels heavy. It feels suffocating. It doesn't feel like the way we would want to talk about religion, talk about our relationship with God. And I think it's not supposed to feel like a crushing burden. Rav Amital, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Har Tzion, was fine to saying, like, yes, the package of Torah is something that we have to carry. It's something that could be heavy, but it's not supposed to feel crushing. It's not supposed to feel like we are buckling under the weight of this. We say, Deracheha Darchei Noam, we name the website Deracheha, that the ways of Torah are supposed to be pleasant. So can we reframe, or could we experience this commitment that we know is part of our saying Shema, of accepting God's kingship upon ourselves? Can we do it in a way that is positive? I have been thinking a lot about this. Firstly, because we recently finished the whole Yamim Noraim season. And during the Yamim Noraim, there is so much talk about Malchut, about Hashem being the Melech and the King is out here, and we blow the shofar to herald the King. And what does it mean that Hashem is our King? Do we really fully believe that? Do we really fully live like that? So this idea of like, is he really our King? And do I really think of my obligations to him the way that somebody in the time where they were living under the rule of a king would really respond? So that's one reason it's been on my mind specifically now during this time period. And to widen that, there have been a slew of articles recently and just so much discussion here in Israel highlighting the thirst that so many secular Israelis, especially young Israelis in their teens and 20s or whatever, have right now for spirituality. And we know this was also like, this trend was pre-October 7th, like, Yishari Bo, who has so many songs that are so spiritual and God-focused, being a sensation here in Israel, or different TV shows that focused on religious Jews being very popular here. Like, before October 7th, we already saw that there was like a thirst or a yearning, or people who were
or even just an openness.
Yeah, an openness to religion. But certainly post-October 7th, there's been like these floodgates that have been open, and slichot, packed in Tel Aviv, or tens of thousands of people at Ne'ilah, or every single hostage coming back and talking, even though they're completely secular, about the connections that they're feeling to Hashem. And you see people like thirsting to hear that. And I just read an article about Chilonim who are keeping Shabbos. So there's been a lot of talk about Israelis and their search for spirituality. And I read those things and I see those things, and I think that they're absolutely beautiful because they represent this search of ubikashta misham at Hashem Elokecha matzata, that we should seek out God, and hopefully if we seek him out, we'll find him. And at the same time, I also think about, where does the commitment piece, or the where does the like accepting of God's yoke upon us fit into that? Because also in religious circles, in the circles that we travel in, you see this deep desire of people to connect, to have a relationship. They don't want to just be in some kind of rote practice. They don't want to just doing things because they don't want to do things just because that's what their parents and their grandparents did. They want to feel an energy. They want to feel a connection. They want to feel like they're in a relationship. Young people actually sometimes look at adults who are very like makpid and very strict and precise in the way that they practice their Judaism or adhere to the Mitzvot, and they see it as something like very external, that's missing like a soul, and that's missing something deeper. And again, I think there's something really beautiful and thought-provoking and touching in all of that, but also core to being a religious Jew is being makabel o malchut shemayim. And that's why there's a reason that the pasuk of Shema is a pasuk that is pretty universally known. Like even Jews who are less connected often know the pasuk of Shema, because we think that it's so core to who we are as Jews, that we have to accept God into our lives. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Is it only when we're feeling it? Is it only when something, really appeals to us? Or does being makabel o malchut shemayim include a sense of commitment that goes beyond that sometimes can be heavier?
So a few things are coming up for me, Shayna, and I mean, we're swimming in the same waters, right? So I am watching all these videos and seeing all these things, and I've honestly been following the music trend for the past about 25 years. People have already been, actually at this point, you can actually give a bit of like a history lesson on the entry of belief-based music into mainstream modern Israeli music. It's just a topic that it's fascinated me for a long, long time. So now we're seeing it in a whole nother iteration, and they're also speaking about the fact that this, the droves that are coming for those tefillot, these are kids who they went through Corona, and then there was like, a 3.5 minute break, and then we had this insane war, and there's been such upheaval in the past 5 years of their life, which is a long, long time if you're 17. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like, it's your life. So I think that phenomenon, we'll see what happens with it, and we're all just kind of like watching it. But it also reminds me, this idea of the, Kabbalat o malchut shemayim. I only heard in Israel here that they use the phrase Noam ol Mitzvot, which is like like they'll say it at bar and bat mitzvahs, like or people write it on invitations that they want their child to accept the softness or the pleasantness
and
of the yoke of mitzvot, right?
I love that phrase. We put it on all our kids.
Yeah, like look at that little twist that we've done there on that, right? But it's such a important reflection about what we're trying to do. Like it's not Shayna and Yosefa. It's a whole generation of people who are saying it's not really in fashion anymore, Shayna, to just be like, yeah, I'm going to do that thing. I'm going to do that tradition. It's always had its outliers, and it's definitely, for so many reasons, it's just not one that's as, I like to say the second parsha of Shema has kind of fallen out of
the Hayayim Shemoah.
Yeah, it's fallen out of fashion a little bit.
The punishments.
It's fallen out of fashion. That sense, like whether it's in the secular world, but also in art, in the religious world, it's very much a challenge. And I would say even more than that, I think that within Israel today, it's very tough to make the case for a halakhically committed lifestyle because the price tag is not as high. We're not worried about falling off the abyss of assimilation, right? That if someone goes to X college and then they're going to meet someone at a party, like we don't have that same concern if you're remaining in Israel. And I would say even more than that, people can leave a halachic lifestyle, but maintain the values and the beliefs, right? How many people walk around Israel?
They're saturated with Judaism.
Yeah, and the values of it and
the
even
holidays.
Believe in the holidays, and they can
Shabbat.
even still send their kids to religious schools. So like the price tag of, I'm almost like always scared to say it, but it's just true. The price tag of sort of releasing oneself from halachic life is pretty, the risk is low at this point. And I think that that's reflected itself in the trends we see around us in Israel. And I'll say one other piece is also significant, or two others within society. The other is that there is no natural pull to the right within the Tilumi world in Israel, because the Haredi population as defined so in Israel there's such a strong divide between that population and the rest of Israel. And so the religious, the Tilumi world, whatever that means in all of its stripes, along with the secular Israelis, are kind of in one boat together. And so the intermixing of waters happens there much more. So you don't have that natural pull to the right, or a pull to the right as like a rebellion against a previous generation. You don't have as easy of a draw there. So it's also a very interesting, just societal moving.
Different than how we grew up.
Very different. And another thing that I think is significant is that here in Israel, we have a kibbutz galuyot of all different kinds of Jews from all over the world. My mother was just here for a very long time, and we were sitting in the park one day. She's like, people here all just look so interesting. And I was like, what do you mean? People look interesting all over. She's like, no, there's people here from all over the world. Like, I don't see this usually. Like, this is not what I see. And I don't even notice it anymore. I've been living here for so long. But I think that on a halachic level, it also is very impactful. There's also been a whole slew of articles about this in the past few months, but meaning psika sfaradit and different ways that halacha has been practiced in different places, whether that's more stringent or less stringent, or even just different communal trends within other factions of the religious world have also influenced other pieces. So that goes in all different kinds of directions, but I think all of that has been really impactful on this question of like, oh, well, all of a sudden my eyes have been opened that like living a believing and even observant life has so many different permutations, and that's just, we're exposed to it all the time.
There is so much to say on this topic. It is an area that I think a lot about, and that I've had the opportunity to discuss on other podcasts, like the difference between what it means to be Orthodox. We grew up in the modern Orthodox world, and what it means to be Dati, and how in the Dati world in Israel, there's just much more of like this spectrum. And some of it's also because of the Sephardi Masorati community that, as you're saying, there's this whole Sephardi community that is very, very strong.
Actually,
and they're very committed to their values, and they're very religious in the sense that they're very traditional, and they're even Orthodox in their belief systems, but they're not always observant in like the very minutia of like the details of the halakha. They just don't fit into the categories and the boxes that many of us that came from America grew up with, and that's definitely a factor. And also, as you said, just the fact that in the diaspora, like the halacha is very, very, very important in terms of holding people in and keeping them connected. And if you're a Jew on a campus, so then like being part of the Hillel and having Shabbat and keeping kosher in your suite, in your dorm, and all these things are what maintain your Jewish identity. Whereas here you could be in the army or in university and you're very Jewish, like Shabbat. Everyone says Shabbat Shalom on Friday, religious or not. Everyone knows about the Chagim. That's the music that's on the radio. So these things are very significant. And I do feel like over my 14 years in Israel, these aspects of Israeli society have really they've touched me, and they've offered a lot, and they've spoken to my heart, and I've grown a lot from them, and I am very, very happy that they're part of my life. And yet, I still come back to, okay, so Yosefa, so tell me, so, raising kids in Israel with your own children or with our students or with your peers, what's your case for why they should be makabel lo mechut shemayim? What's your case for why they should be halachic if you could have a very rich and meaningful Jewish value-based life without, being makpid on borer on Shabbat?
Oh, Shayna, this is such a complex topic. I mean, look, my first instinctual answer is that this is what we're supposed to do. Meaning that's an instinctual, because that's how I've grown up. Meaning there are the halachot that we're supposed to keep. That's not a particularly attractive answer when you're a 12-year-old asking me, right? But I also I seriously actually want to go back to the sports idea, because a game with no rules or something without boundaries loses its thrust, and it loses its cohesion very quickly. And that's something that that's a long-term idea though. Like that's not something, I'm saying this seriously, that's not something that I would say to like my 12-year-old. Like that's a bit of a wisdom answer. I think there's like a life experience piece there. And the halacha to me very often is this boundary, right? It's this, and do I always understand or even sometimes I'm chatzuf enough to say agree with the boundaries? Not necessarily, but I know that it holds up something else, that those boundaries are really, really necessary. And I guess also when I look at all these trends that we've mentioned, I don't want to put my eggs in like the basket of like feeling or only what I connect to, or like, I think it's lovely. I think it's fascinating, but I, of course, in my own religious life, look for those moments. Right. Yes, probably you much more than the previous generation did. I do look for them because to me, they're a sign of vitality. And I'm as we're speaking, I'm thinking about on Motzei Simchat Torah, right? We have, when there's one day of Chag, and we have these hakafot shniyot. We have sort of like musical, whether it's dancing or different kinds of events that happen on Motzei Simchat Torah. And I was in my neighborhood with Odelia Berlin, who is a name in Israel that's known, but she's kind of like made a career out of having like Yom Kippur davening as a concert, meaning in Elul, she has these big events, and she's amazing at having tefillah along with singing and really creating that for a crowd of people. And it was just like my moment to like process the insanity of what had happened here over Chag, like, which I just wasn't able to do in like my home and the way everything was developing there. Right. And like, I look for those moments of connection. Yeah. Like, did I grow up like sitting and crying as I'm singing Pesukim from Tehillim? No, I didn't grow up like that. But like, that's like, it's totally a significant part of my life now. So it's not that I don't put stock in being moved, but it's just that I don't want that to be the foundation of the condition of my religious life. It's a very important dimension, but I think that at the base of this does have to be that sense of the commitment, and I'm here to stay. And for every person who shows up to shul when they feel like it, someone needs to hold the shul up. Right, do you know what I'm saying?
Exactly. I mean, I think it cuts back to Rav Amital used to speak about how our connection to Judaism really has two elements that go back to Har Sinai. We have the Na'aseh v'nishma, the Jewish people just saying like, yeah, we're all in, we feel it, we're going to do it, and then we'll hear all the details, but like something that's coming from a deep emotional place of connection. And then we have the midrashim that tell us about kafa lehem har kagigi, that the mountain was held over their heads in this like threatening way. If you don't accept this, like this may be the end right here. And he said both are important because on the one hand, yes, we want people to feel connected. But on the other hand, if it's just like, here, our children like to say, lo bali, if it doesn't speak to you right now and you're not connecting and whatever, then what becomes of it? There has to be an element that holds us in, So if I think about like my arguments for like why halacha and like why is this important, not so different than yours, but like the idea, first of all, of commandedness, of the sense of like that there's a higher authority, of that we're committed to something greater than ourselves, that there's a being outside of ourselves, that life isn't just about what I feel right now or what I'm in the mood for. Yeah. That's very, very, very important to me. And I think in general, people look for that, secular, religious, Jewish or not, they look for something bigger than themselves. Mm-hmm. So it could be yoga for them, or it could be the way that they eat or whatever, but they want to be connected or committed, I would even say, to something outside of themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think in addition to that...
That creates structure, by the way.
Yeah, that creates structure and gives meaning. And in addition to that, I think of it almost as like there's a vertical and there's horizontal connection going on here. So in addition to the commandedness, vertically, I feel like a connection to the Mesorah. Like we come from thousands of years of generations of Jews who have sacrificed themselves and incorporated this into their lives, and like I'm just another link in that chain. And like to me, a big part of what's kept that chain going is the halacha. And as you said, it's not just that like the feeling doesn't necessarily always last for me in the moment. It's very hard to give that over to children. Yeah. Like what if they don't feel it? Yeah. You need something concrete. You need something that is something that's not abstract, that they could hold on to. And on the horizontal level, connection to other Jews. I think halacha gives us this connection. Like, you could fly off to London, or we could go to America, or we could go to a shul in the middle of, South Africa or somewhere where we've never been, and you find people who are living similar lifestyles in terms of their
common language.
Yes, the language and the connection and the community. So there's a lot to talk about in terms of halacha, but these ideas always bring me back to this amazing poem, a Wordsworth sonnet that I read in 10th grade in Central in my English class with Mrs. Esther Hertzfeld, called Nuns Fret Not at Their Convent's Narrow Room. It's a poem about how nuns who choose to live in their convent, or students who choose to lock themselves up in the ivory tower of their university, are happy, even though someone from the outside may look at them as like, why would you put yourself there? The line that always sticks out to me of the poem is, in truth, the prison onto which we doom ourselves, no prison is. Meaning, can we come to Judaism with this orientation of like, yes, from the outside, someone may look at this as a prison, wow, it's a yoke. You're suffocating under like all these obligations that you have to do. But what do you mean? The prison onto which we doom ourselves, no prison is. In my mind, it's the difference between, when we may tell a kid, go to your room, and then their room is a prison, or the teenager that runs up to their room and slams the door and says, nobody come in here. The prison onto which we doom ourselves, no prison is. So yes, there's commitment, and yes, we're contained, and yes, there is something that is, holding us in and stopping us from being able to do whatever we want, matai shabali, whenever I feel like it. And yet, the noam ol mitzvot that you're talking about, the pleasantness of that is that if we choose that we want to take that upon ourselves and that we want to put ourselves there, it changes our whole perspective, our whole way of thinking about it. And I think that is something that I try very much to think about and to convey to my children. But I will add that you and I, we like structure. We like routine. We like habits, as you said earlier. What do you think about people who are free spirits? What do you think about those people that you come across who are like, I just want freedom. I just don't want somebody telling me what to do all the time.
Yeah, look, if they're that kind of person, but they are looking to be within the halachic world, right? Meaning if they're that kind of person and it pulls them out of it, then we can understand that there's a personality type that is pulling them in a certain way. But if somebody really feels that way, but they are looking to be in a committed space of halachic living, so I think that first of all, we've already said that there's a lot of different observant lifestyles out there. Like halachic observance looks different in different spaces. And I think that that's just an important thing to say. Like, meaning, I'm not getting to the nitty gritty of like what people are choosing, yes or not, but meaning observant life looks different. And yeah, I said before, almost this idea that maybe they are going to be the people that show up once in a while. Do you know what I'm saying? That they, maybe not because Zema Shabali, but that's what I'm capable of doing, right? Meaning that's what I am in the personality and the, the way my life is developed. That's what I'm capable of. And so, yes, thankfully there are the people there who are going to hold up the daily grind of the institutions, but then they can lean on those institutions, right? When they want to.
They don't have to opt out completely.
Exactly. I think that that's a blessing. Like, I think it's a blessing for I'll, by the way, put in another category here, not just people who are personality-wise don't love boundaries, but people who have a really hard time with their belief. Okay. And you and I have spoken before about ideas about like social orthodoxy, but we'll like footnote that for a second. But meaning people who are not fully in because they feel like they can't be because of a belief that's...
Meaning they're part of the community, but something internally
is a barrier for them.
Back.
And I think that also for all of those among us, that the institutions that we have are a blessing, because those end up creating boundaries. I'm really speaking here from personal experience of people that I know very, very deeply, that, the boundaries of the schools that their kids go to, or yes, the expectations of the shul or of the community, or what is okay to be seen doing outside. Like, those are all pieces that, for meaning that they appreciate it. It's not, it's again, as you said, it's a prison that they chose to be in. I mean, and they want to be part of that, but, and that holds them. So maybe it's not that like strictures of halacha, but it is the halacha as it's expressed on a communal level. And I think that that's a really important thing. And I don't underestimate the value of that. I think that that's significant. Sometimes people can interestingly find themselves partnering, right? Getting married to somebody who is different than that personality type. And that might create, its own dynamic.
Or being in a very strong friendship with someone who's very different than you.
Exactly, right? Or finding themselves in I'm just saying recently, someone I know, their niece made Aliyah. She comes from a traditional background, but she made Aliyah and started living in an ulpan that everybody was from. Everybody's observant there. And her only family here is her religious aunt. And so all of a sudden she's found herself basically being observant, which is like the funniest thing, right? So there's so many different ways that this life is so interesting how this can happen. So I think that's really significant. And I would also say that trying to figure out like how one can find the noam in the ol, right? Not just the feeling of, I have to get out of here. And I would definitely have these conversations with students. So like, where can you find the pleasantness, right? Within,
what is that for you?
What does that look like for you? I think that that's also an important conversation.
I also want to just add the point that it's a real challenge. It really, really is. But I don't see it as a challenge that's unique to religion. Meaning when somebody struggles... I always
love when you make that point, Shayna. It's so important.
I really, really feel that way.
It's so important, and I don't think about it enough.
I really feel that way, and I find it with in conversations with students and with peers all the time, that like when there's a struggle of commitment, it's not only usually about religion. Like there's so many areas where we have to commit and give up freedom. I signed a contract to be in a certain job. There's parts that I love about it. There's parts that drive me crazy. There's parts that I wish I didn't have to do, but I'm committed to the job. That's what it means to be in a marriage. That's what it means to raise children. Like I'm committed to them, even though I can't stand making, their lunches or whatever it is. So when we struggle with issues of commitment, it's good. It's important for us to realize that like anything that's meaningful to us that we really want to be invested in is going to require a commitment. Because it means that I want to be connected to something that's bigger than myself. And we have to decide if we want that also in the area of religion. But it's not something that's like a problem with religion. It's a fact of life. And coming back to Shema, because that's where we started, when we recite Shema, every day, each morning and each evening. For those people who daven Mariv, we have the opportunity to think about these ideas and to recognize that we are accepting God's will and that we are going to try our best to love Him unconditionally. We're going to try to love Him unconditionally, and we are going to try to live in accordance with His commandments. That's what it means to be Mekabel or Malchut Shemayim.
Shayna, one more piece that I want to add in connection to Shema is actually the Shema that's said at night of Kriyat Shema ala mitah. Okay? It's interesting. It's something that that is in addition to the day, and it's in addition to the Kriyat Shema of the morning and Mariv. And that Chazal enacted that we recite, right, just the first paragraph of V'ahavta, and also the bracha of Hamapil, which is a bracha sort of asking God for uninterrupted sleep to keep away bad dreams or bad things that can happen to us in the nighttime. And this Shema is not really usually recited in fulfillment of the mitzvah of a Kriyat Shema, right? Ideally, we would do that at Mariv, but really more to invoke sort of this idea of protection. Nighttime is scary, right? Not just for kids. It invokes a lot of fears, right? We all know that, and know that also even more so in the past few years.
Yeah. Or even just things that seem very overwhelming and like impossible at night. In the morning, we often have a different perspective.
Totally. And many hold that both men and women should be saying the Kriyat Shema ala mitah. And women who do not recite Mariv can also use this Kriyat Shema as a fulfillment of the nighttime acceptance of Malchut Shemayim. And also, they can also choose to add, right, the next portions if they want to in the nighttime Kriyat Shema before going to sleep, if they hadn't said it earlier. The one thing I'll also say about the bracha of Hamapil is that it's fascinating because it's actually like the nighttime companion to the bracha we say in Birkot HaShachar of Hamavir Shana Me'inai U'Tuma Me'afapai, right? That then we talk about like God who removes sleep from our eyes, and here we're basically asking for good sleep. And so this also is very parallel to that, and is another reason that ideally we should say bracha of Hamapil at night. I'll just add one technical or like real life thing. This is another one that really hits me in terms of like the habit forming. I didn't grow up saying Shema before I went to sleep, and I found that it's one of the hardest things for me to say regularly because like the habit of just falling asleep is something that is sometimes even stronger than saying this. I say it with my kids like 3 times before I've actually gone to bed. So I kind of feel like I checked off the box. I say it with Shem Hashem, like I've said it, but when it comes to me going to sleep, this is very, very hard for me.
Yeah. I did grow up with Shema being part of my nighttime routine, and beyond just saying Shema and my parents saying it with us and singing Hamalach, they would have us say this line after we said Shema. They would have us say in English, I love you, Hashem, with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my might. And it made such an impression on me, and it's something I also did with my own kids. But I don't say Hamapil. And I did at one point in my life say Hamapil, and I just found it really, really hard. At some point, I stopped, both because you're not really supposed to talk after Hamapil, and like there was something about that just made me anxious, and also because it's hard as you're like kind of half falling asleep. Shema I know by heart, but it was hard for me to like take out a sitter and say Hamapil, but. Yeah, I started Netilat Yadayim. Maybe I'll take on the Karban Tamid and Hamapil. You'll check back in with me, but because there is something about the bracha of Hamapil that I do think is meaningful. It's praising God for a good sleep, and it's talking about His protection, and I think that that's special. Anyway, it's been a long episode, a lot to talk about, but if we want to sum up, what's your takeaway? What do you kind of walk away thinking about?
I think I want to take stock of like what I honestly can fit into my day and what I can't at the moment. I think that going back to like the candor of, sometimes we make choices or we cut something out or we abbreviate and abridge. But I think that like me showing up for myself and being like, okay, now what are we capable of now? And maybe we could shift that. And I think that like not making excuses in those, for those moments is something that I want to review. I want to think about it now and make sure that I'm showing up the best way that I can.
I was going to say something similar. Just want to be more honest with myself and really take the time to think about what's right for me right now at this moment in terms of what I'm committed to. And also in terms of our conversation about commitment, just know that if something is important to us and we think that it's worthy of our commitment, then we should give it the time that it deserves. So just thinking about specifically for me what that means.
Thanks, Shayna.
Thank you.
Did this conversation move you or cause you to think about the topic in a new way? Please share these episodes with friends and family and start conversations about meaningful mitzvah observance with all of them. You can contact us with thoughts and questions at womentalkingmitzvot@gmail.com. That's womentalkingmitzvot@gmail.com. Looking forward to our next conversation.